Now, you may have heard a couple things over the last few weeks about how the Canadian election is heating up, but I think it's really worth diving into because this isn't just an election at this point. We are watching a political party potentially launch, and I'm not exaggerating here, one of the biggest comebacks in the history of Western politics. 2 months ago, the Canadian election in 2025 was looking like a formality, really. It was a bygone conclusion that, without doubt, the Conservative Party was going to take over. Justin Trudeau was astronomically unpopular. The Conservative Party was managing itself well, and most pundits and odds makers and forecast models had the Conservative Party of Canada with more or less a 98-99% chance of forming the next Canadian government. But a lot of things have happened in the 2 months since, and we have witnessed a political turnaround that I can honestly say I have never seen anything like in my life. You have to understand, one of the things about Canadian politics is that the Liberal Party is often referred to as the natural party of Canada, as sort of a nickname, because they hold power most of the time and have for a majority of Canada's existence. They are regarded as the party that is almost always in power, and it takes Conservatives normally a lot of effort to get them out of office, and it normally isn't too long until the Liberals are back in power anyway. But the Conservatives this time seem to have a perfect storm. Trudeau was underwater in his approval ratings. The economy in Canada was stagnating. There was a lot of resentment over the issues of housing and immigration. But then, possibly Canada's biggest hater, Donald J. Trump, was elected President of the United States. One of the disturbing, defining parts of Trump's second term is how committed he seems to be to the idea of American expansion. I don't need to go into detail about what he said about Greenland, about what he said about the Panama Canal, and you've almost certainly heard his rhetoric, sometimes joking, sometimes seemingly serious, about making Canada the 51st state of the United States of America. And look, if you give Trump the benefit of the doubt as much as you possibly can and say that annexing Canada is entirely a joke, which I do not believe, but let's give him that benefit of the doubt just because we're being nice. Even if they are jokes, if you, as an American citizen, which I assume you are, most of my subscribers are, if you woke up every day to a news story about Xi Jinping and the Communist Party of China joking about how they can't wait to make Hawaii their next province, to annex it and take it over, even if it was clearly joking, if they made those jokes every morning and talked about it half as much as Trump does about annexing Canada, you would be understandably quite upset and concerned, which at the moment, a lot of Canadians are. Now, the second thing that we have to consider when looking at this political comeback for Canada's Liberal Party is the fact that they changed leaders. Justin Trudeau, who, like I said, was incredibly unpopular, did eventually resign after he was pressured by the Liberal Party itself to do so. And Mark Carney replaced him. Now, Mark Carney has quite a bit of respect amongst the Canadian electorate as a way, especially in comparison to Trudeau. He was head of the Bank of Canada during the global financial crisis, worked with a former Conservative government, and kind of made a name for himself, at least in this campaign, of somebody who had no real connection with Trudeau at all, not with his government. The only points of contention really are that he has explicitly said that the economic advice that he gave to Trudeau when Trudeau was still in office basically was not followed. And I would say that the main difference between Trudeau and Carney is that Mark Carney is much more of a pragmatist and less ideologically motivated in comparison to Trudeau, who was always willing to stand by his convictions, even to the point at which it made his party politically untenable. And these two factors, genuine concern over Trump's language and his rhetoric towards Canada and its sovereignty, coupled with a new Liberal leader, kind of set the perfect stage for the Liberals to really come back. But it's not so much to do with how that changes their relationship with the Conservative Party, but with another party that I haven't mentioned so far, and that is Canada's New Democratic Party. For those of you that don't know, the New Democratic Party is a political party that is to the left of the Liberals. They are a left-wing option for people that are fed up with the Liberal Party. And they've used that to quite a lot of success in the past. There was even a point at which they became the official opposition because the Liberal Party was collapsing. And the New Democratic Party was in a pretty good spot 2 months ago by their own standards. With the Liberal Party in the dumps, people hating Trudeau, it seemed like the perfect storm for them to maybe even become the opposition party again if things kept getting worse, because they would become the de facto left-wing option aside from the Liberals, who were sinking like you would not believe. But the fortunes of the New Democratic Party took a pretty sharp turn once this Liberal leadership change took place, because not only was there now massive motivation to vote for the Liberal Party because of Trump's words, but also Mark Carney could bring back voters that had left specifically because of Trudeau. This is the actual polling, like an average of it over the last few years. And you'll see that the Liberal Party is bouncing back like no party in the Western world ever should that quickly. And you can see that some of it is because up the top there, you have some conservative voters coming back now that Trudeau isn't there. And that is a factor, but a much, much bigger factor is that the New Democratic Party, that orange line there, is heading towards an electoral wipeout. The New Democratic Party has gone from on the cusp of winning 20% of the vote to probably not even being in double digits. They're looking at like a 9% share of the popular vote come the election. And that seemingly has gone all to the advantage of the Liberal Party. We even have members of the NDP, former leaders of the party, coming out and saying, do not vote for the NDP. We need one united left-wing party in this election, and that has to be the Liberals. It's hard really even to blame the Canadian Conservatives for what's happening here, because Pierre Poilievre, I mean, of course, maybe he could have associated with that like international like New Age conservative movement less and had like less perceived ties to Trump and his movement, but he's polling at 37.5% right now. And that is very good for the Conservative Party. If they had had 37.5% of the vote at either of the last two elections, they absolutely would have been able to form government. But it's just that in this particular environment, the Canadian left is coming together and uniting in a way that 2 months ago looked completely impossible. And it seems that every day in the campaign so far, despite how short it's been, things are getting better for the broader Canadian left. Just when it looks like Mark Carney might be in some scandal because he's skipping a debate or because some Liberal candidate was involved in a controversy, what happens? Donald Trump comes down from the sky like a Liberal hero and announces 25% tariffs on car imports, threatening hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs and making the spotlight a battle between Mark Carney and Donald Trump himself, which is how a lot of left-wing people are perceiving the Canadian election. Because that spells death for the Conservative Party in this election. If there is amongst a majority of Canadians, which, let me be clear, over the last couple of elections, if you put the NDP vote and the Liberal vote together, that is a majority of Canadians. If a majority of Canadians perceive this as a time of existential threat, where a dickhead down south in America is threatening the sovereignty of the country, and Mark Carney is widely perceived as the leader who is standing up to that antagonistic bullshit, how do you make the argument for a change of government in that environment? Particularly when left-wing voters are coalescing behind one guy. The Canadian political system is interesting because normally the left there is fractured. The Canadian left is so large that it has to be split between different parties just for the system to work, really. You have the Liberal Party, the NDP, and even the Green Party, who normally in any given election, those three together will get a majority of the votes. But split between them, it always gives the Conservatives a doorway to win. But the situation we're in now is that Trump has forced their hand, and we are witnessing what it looks like when left-wing people in Canada put their differences aside and unite behind one party. In that moment, and in this election, they are becoming aware that this is their election to lose, and that is why they're now in the lead.